Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, we have a very special guest. He is in the great city of New York, New York City. His name is John Schoneboom. You'll see this if you're watching this on my 3 YouTube channels, Substack, X, Rumble, and he published a book. You also see the title on the cover of his book, I should say. The full title is Stop Me If I Say Something Crazy, Disinformation and Dissent in the Post-Truth World. His last name is spelled Schoneboom, and it's his fourth book. He's written four books, 2 nonfiction, 2 fiction. He has a website. It's his full name.com, johnschoneboom.com. So I'll put a link to that. But I read through his book with great interest. A lot of topics I'm familiar with, but I think it's still important about where we are in this kind of disreality world. We're kind of talking about it in the pre-show. I guess some people use this kind of word, normies, and conspiracy theorists is like a term that I don't like. I like more kind of like the paradigm of the psychos, schizos, and normies, where the battle is really between the schizos and the psychos, and the normies don't get it at all. They're just somewhere in the center of the curve. But I think this book encapsulates that. So I read through it. There's a lot of topics we can talk about, but maybe a good start is just to introduce yourself, John. Talk about your background. And I know, let me see if I've got your bio. He's an award-winning novelist, playwright, and writer of nonfiction. He has a PhD in MA in creative writing, MA in science, technology, and public policy, and a BA in political science. His artistic and research focuses on the interplay of dream life, delusion, propaganda, and reality. Very important. He also won an Artist Fellowship Award for playwriting from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and a Northern Writers Award for fiction. And then the novels he's written is Fontoon and The Day Aunt Gina Came to Town. And then he also wrote a surreal poet. Anyway, so John, welcome to the show, and please introduce yourself.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, well, I think you've done a good job there with the intro. I'm a writer. I write absurdist fiction, and since the real world is also pretty absurd, I try to capture some of that in my nonfiction. I would say, I have a special research focus in both fiction and nonfiction on this sort of fine line between delusion and what we take to be reality, and the things that I'm really interested in the things that we accept as true and real that, if you look a little closely, it starts to dissipate, and we can't be so sure about that after a while. So how do we know what we think we know?
Right. Isn't that epistemology? Isn't that really kind of a philosophical question?
It is indeed, yeah.
How do we know what we know in 2026?
Well, we just read the papers, man. You just got to believe whatever the New York Times tells you to believe, right?
And, I prefer Fox News. So
okay, Fox News. Go to your people. Well, this is the thing. It's become a battle of narratives. Really, this is why in the subtitle about the post-truth world, I think that refers to that truth is up for grabs. It has very little to do with evidence, empirical reality. It has everything to do with who's my tribe, what do my people believe, what's the narrative that I'm happy with, and trying to get somebody to budge from that is challenging, And I get sick of. Stop me if I'm talking too much, but
I want you to talk the whole time, John. Honestly, right. I'm not kidding. Please go. Go ahead.
Because I will tend to ramble and then forget where I'm going.
That's perfect.
But it's what I get tired of, because we seem to be divided into echo chambers, right? We're in these little silos, and so if all we're after is to get high fives from the people who already agree with us, that's easy to do. But I get tired of that pretty quick. So what I'm always trying to do is reach across the divide, try to talk to people who don't agree with me, but who on some level I feel like ought to, or if not agree with me, then at least there's a conversation that should be there that is so hard to have, because of this divide is so absolute, and we're divided into camps. Like we get a complicated new issue like COVID, say for example. It comes at us out of nowhere. All of a sudden, it's this pandemic, and it's and there's a lot of unknowns, right? And so you would think, living in a democracy that, or a republic, or let's not quibble over those kind of words, but in a democratic, open society that believes in science, you'd think there'd be more discussion and debate, because both science and democracy require debate and discussion and dissent. It's not like an option. It's like how it works, right? And so we didn't get that. What we got, surprisingly, and this is kind of what spurred me on to write this book originally, was an almost instant division of views into required and forbidden views, right? So like there was all of a sudden stuff that you had to buy into, you had to believe, and if you said the other thing, the forbidden views would have, and there were a few of them, but you weren't just wrong. In that case, you were considered a lunatic, you were crazy, you were evil, stupid, and crazy, basically, and so that's, I argue in the book, that's a form of it's tabooing dissent is what it is. So it's not just, there's a huge difference between a scientific disagreement and the complete squashing of opposing views and cutting it off in the sort of strangling another view in the crib.
Right.
And you
think
can,
well, it's been termed, I like this term, it's the battle against heterodoxy. So it's like they're fighting against this ability to people have different positions or conclusions. And there's a reason behind it. A lot of people didn't know the reason. It was money, I think, on COVID. But it was that disallowance, the thing that's part of like the scientific method or just the philosophical method of asking questions was really disallowed. And like you said, it was punished. There was punitive people. I got kicked off of YouTube. I just got my YouTube channels back. They were gone for 4 years, all over COVID.
Yep.
And now they're letting me talk about COVID. Like this won't get banned. So
yeah, that's amazing, right? So, but it's, I mean, so the funny thing is, everybody on both sides of that in the COVID thing, does this medicine work? Does that medicine work? Everybody said that they were following the science, and everybody said the other side was anti-science. And so I started thinking about that, and I was like, well, the nice thing about that really is that if we're going to talk science has ways of determining who's got the better argument, right? And it involves, you've got to tolerate, science, like I say, requires dissent and debate and welcomes multiple hypotheses about anything, because what you want to watch out for in science, I think if you ask any honest scientist, they'll say you don't want to have just confirmation bias. So that's the role of the multiple hypotheses. You test them all, and you don't want to just try to prove yourself right. That's confirmation bias. But what you try to do is prove yourself wrong in science, right? So that's why, normal arguments on the internet are trying to prove yourself right. I've got a link that says I'm right. No, I've got the opposite link that says I'm right. And then you go off into your echo chambers and get your high fives. But if you're a scientist, or if you're interested in what the actual truth is, you try to prove yourself wrong. And so you need the other views. You need to understand the other views. And of course, when it's something like a pandemic, it's an emergency, and so the argument was, well, we don't have time for this disinformation nonsense because it's an emergency. And the problem with that, you might for a moment say, okay, well, it's an emergency and we got to do something. But the problem is that there really aren't any shortcuts. That, how do you know it's disinformation if you haven't had the debate, if you haven't had the discussion, if you haven't looked at the evidence, if you haven't assessed the competing views, and that's complicated more by, it's not just, they treat the forbidden views as if they're just being spouted by, morons and lunatics living in the basement, with no thought about science at all. But it's just like these crazy weirdos who were just trying to pollute the information space. But it wasn't at all. It was, people who are some of the most distinguished scientists in the world, some of the, world-class epidemiologists had some different views about how you handle a pandemic and whether a lockdown is good and all these different issues. I think one of the most highly sort of published critical care specialists was involved in various treatment protocols, and he didn't know he was a rebel or a troublemaker. He was being a doctor, and so there were all these doctors trying to come up with treatments for this new alarming disease, right? And so they came out and they said, good news, everybody. We've had some success using this drug or that drug. This is a treatable, it's serious for old people especially, but, it's treatable disease. And we've had some, we're sharing our information like you're supposed to do in science so that people can try it out for themselves and prove it or disprove it, run with it. And instead of what they expected, which would be the normal thing in science, which would be people would either adopt it or they'd test it or they'd welcome the hypothesis at least. Instead of that, they were like kicked off YouTube, demonetized, called morons and lunatics, and suffered intense ad hominem attacks, financial penalties. Some people lost their jobs. These are not people who set out to be rebels and dissenters. They just were doing their job, So, it only takes a minute to at least recognize that the people with dissenting opinions, forbidden opinions, had qualifications that they deserve to be listened to.
Right. People lost their careers. They lost their jobs at universities. Some people's entire career was based on YouTube. So when YouTube pulled the plug on them, they were like damaged. It actually benefited me because I took all my stuff and put it on a different platform. So actually I got away. YouTube is not that great of a platform, by the way, for a wide variety of reasons. But
did you go to Rumble?
Yeah, I went to Rumble. I just turned it into an audio podcast, so it's on Spotify. So I had a contract with Spotify that was much better than the situation I had on YouTube, and they never censored me. I think they took one of my episodes down. I would say I'm a dissenter in COVID is very fair, and they only took one of the episodes down. I'm over 2,000 episodes now, but back then it was just one. So anyway, it kind of made me have to survive in an odd way, which was more tough, but
get creative
creative. Exactly.
Yeah. So wait, and anyway, to sort of continue the thought, as a normal layperson who's not a scientist or an engineer, it's a really difficult. We're in the difficult position of if we're willing to go as far as listening to both sides, we still don't know how to evaluate it, right? Because we're not subject matter experts, and so. I don't know who's right and who's wrong about these things, and I'm not trying to argue that one side is right and one side is wrong. What I am trying to argue is that we should recognize when there's a discussion to be had, when we ought to be talking instead of tabooing and banning and censoring, right? Which is most of the time in a democracy and in science. So, but what we can do a lot of the time, we may not know why a building fell down or what medicine works and doesn't work, or whether there was a chemical attack in Syria or any of these things, the things that we're just not qualified to tell what's the truth of the matter. What we can do is have a look at the debate itself and sort of look at the methods and sort of see by looking at the process, if one side is saying, I have this evidence and I'm a credentialed, I'm not a lunatic in a basement. I've had a long career. I've got credentials and I have this evidence that I think we should talk about. And the other side is saying, we're demonetizing your YouTube channel. You're a right-wing lunatic and nobody should listen to you. Then at least we know that one side is doing what you'd expect in science and the other side is doing something else, right? So you still don't know the truth. You don't, if you're honest, but that you can see that one side is doing science and the other side is doing something else. And so I think that is at least your first clue towards the truth, but the problem is, and again, I feel like I'm starting to ramble here, so you can just slap me in the head if I'm rambling too much.
No.
But the problem is, okay. Now I've forgotten. I've lost my train of thought.
The thing is that so they really punished people, but it was part of this larger agenda of centralization of control. So the people who were being honest, I don't think that they saw the larger agenda, and I think it ties into maybe some of your other themes of your other work of like how paranoid should you be? Because I almost think like there was a surface argument, but behind it was for me. It was a centralization of control and totalitarianism, but
Yeah,
not in the
yeah,
way that we saw in the past where Hitler's such an obvious creep, you know? It's like the
right.
centralization of a different way of largest part of our economy, healthcare, but it's centralization and totalitarianism. And it's very relevant today. Like we literally had Fauci in Congress claiming Fifth Amendment privileges that he didn't claim because he's been pardoned. So you literally, this is not, their book is totally relevant to right now. Like, what
Yeah,
is the real information and who's really dissenting? Like, he is a literal, he should, I mean, the Justice Department, as a lawyer, I can say this. I think, in my opinion, they don't function well because he easily should be arrested for the work he did. He's clearly lying on a wide variety of subjects and was playing cognitive warfare or infiltration or cast unseen stuff on the public, man. Would you agree with that?
well, I do agree with that. I think, but I at least think, I mean, it's such a fascinating case study there because Fauci, if once you're convinced that Fauci is like, he's Saint Fauci, he's a hero, that he did the best he could under the circumstances and he saved millions of lives, and he was the man on the front lines, and we can forgive him his little mistakes that he might have made along the way. There's then if you're trying to convince somebody of that ilk that maybe there might be things about Fauci's history that you're not aware of, or that there's it's not that simple, and you think somebody who it seems like an artificial divide. In other words, that people cling to a narrative for political reasons. They all of a sudden, this is what drives me crazy. Everything gets put into left and right, into that that's that absolute binary. So if you want to prevent a person on the left from ever considering any kind of argument, whether it's scientific or anything else, just call it right wing. And then that person will consider that a poison view, and there's hardly anything you can say, right? And so if you just want to say, well, let's look at this guy's career record, let's look at what he did during the AIDS crisis, and let's look at what he did to, I don't know if you're familiar with what he was in charge with. They had this horrifying program of torturing dogs where they trap them they put their head in a bag full of sand flies, and I don't even know what they were trying to learn, but I don't know if
he also poisoned, my understanding, he was involved in some stuff in NYC where they were giving certain testing to kids who were orphans or something like that.
Well, I think that might have been, they did test drugs on like poor black kids basically at one point.
Like Tuskegee all over again.
Yeah, it was like that, so, and I don't know, I don't know how much it's fair to blame Fauci personally for all of that, but I'm saying, once again, what I always say is that this conversation is to be had. That's if I can get people to converse more and across, and to like have these binaries at least be a little bit less absolute, and acknowledge that there are complicated issues that are worthy of discussion. I'm not going to try to persuade anybody of which side is right or which side is wrong, but to open a window out of your echo chamber and to poke your head out now and then and have a discussion, because I think these aren't or shouldn't be left and right issues. Just because you think, and I identify, I don't know about you or your audience, I identify as a lefty, but I've got friends my dad is a sort of right-wing conservative. My mom's a left sort of Democrat, and my dad's a Republican, So I grew up sort of thinking, well, I love both these people. I don't have to hate anybody. I'll listen to arguments,
Right. So I'm trying to de-binarize. I've invented my own word. It's binarize. I'm trying to de-binarize myself into simple two-position views, like right, left, Republican, Democrat.
Yeah.
I just want to know what the issue is. That's it.
Exactly.
So that's the way I would define myself. Yeah.
It's a divide and conquer strategy, seemingly, and so if like, what is left or right? Why do you have to be left wing or right wing to want answers to those kind of questions that Rand Paul was asking? I thought he was asking reasonable questions. You said this in private, where there was all this private stuff about, it probably came from a lab. And then you came out in public and not only denied that it was possibly from a lab, but actively helped demonize anyone who said it might have been, and so it's not just a question of being wrong. I can forgive anyone for being wrong, but I don't think we ever need to demonize dissent. I think that's where we get away from what we should all agree are our values. I think this is the interesting thing. We do share values across left and right. I don't think you will find people who want to live in an authoritarian state. I think most of people on both sides would say, no, we're anti-authoritarian. You don't want to, do you want censorship to be, do you really, there's times we want people to shut up, but do we really want to have censorship, censorship of dissent, of opposing views? Is that really where we want to go? I think, can you, and so in the book, I'm sort of trying to go step by step through these case studies saying, I'm not saying which side, there's a Syrian chemical attack. There's the case of Building 7, which is an interesting thing to look at, a couple other ones. And it's like, I'm not telling you what to believe because I don't know, but I'm saying, is it as crazy? One view here is depicted as nuts. And if we just go step by step and dare to look at, is there evidence? Is it nuts? Then, at what point, I'm like, stop me when it gets crazy, because if you look, you may find things that in a bunch of cases where it's that kind of situation where one side is saying, look, I did my own, there's a computer model of the collapse of Building 7. And there was an official computer model done by National Institute of Standards and Technology. And then there was, which had its data was secret. You weren't allowed to see the data they put into the model, right? And then so this architect or engineer guy from University of Alaska, quite a long distinguished career, decided to try to replicate the results and do a model that took all of the NIST assumptions, and he couldn't make that building fall using any of their assumptions. And so the only way he could get that building to fall the way it did was, all the columns blew out at once. He didn't say controlled demolition. He said, but they all had to give out at certain places all at once. That's the only way it would do that. And he said,
John, we're literally 1 month away from the 25-year anniversary.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So these are still relevant, guys. Super relevant. Yeah. And it goes back to that statement I said, the battle against heterodoxy, which is that certain people have an interest in getting you to one position and one position only on whatever. Yeah. Safe and effective. It's a vaccine. It's not. They changed the definition. It's freaking gene therapy. Yeah. Like I wouldn't touch that with like a 4,000-foot pole. People got lied to and deceived into putting something in their body they didn't need. They probably could. Natural immunity would have been better if they took vitamin C, vitamin D, and just sat in the sun or something. It's probably healthy. It's probably the healthiest thing you could do for any disease. Actually, I'm not a doctor, but I'll tell you, go get sunshine. Eat vitamin C right away.
Yeah, sunshine is good. I mean, they did. I just keep wanting to reemphasize that I don't know how Building 7 fell. That's not my point. I'm not trying to say it was controlled demolition. I'm trying to say we had a guy who was a respectable, long career, highly published, architecture guy who did a computer model that the data were public. Anyone could take the data and run it through their own software and test it out and find out what was wrong with it. If they could disprove it, show if there were flaws, anyone could go through and figure it out, as opposed to the other model that the government put out, which declared all the data secret because they said it would jeopardize public safety. So do we know which model is right? No. And I'm not trying to tell anyone which model is right. I'm saying the one where data is transparent is the way science is supposed to work, and the other way isn't the way science is supposed to work. So that means there's a conversation to be had. That means you're not crazy for trying to have the conversation, which is not what the basic sense in society, I think, is that if you talk about Building 7, in fact, as soon as I say the word Building 7, I feel like a lunatic. I feel like, it's like, I said magic words that make me look like a lunatic.
Isn't that intentional though? Isn't that the intentionality?
I reckon it must be. There's a lot of effort put into promoting that kind of message. And that's
'cause
tabooing dissent. And that's what I think is unhealthy.
It's a good word, tabooing it. I like that taboo word. It's not used enough because it's a deliberate creation of a taboo of critical analysis, or just, I mean, you can watch the video.
Yeah.
The video,
I mean,
it's
enforcing a viewpoint, and it's that's really the best way to get somebody to not even go near an issue. They don't, if you want to get somebody not to even look at it, make them, make it so that if you start to look into it, all your friends are going to think you've gone over
you're out of your mind. There's another kind of really popular podcast, a guy I know. He's his title of his podcast is "My Parents Think I'm Crazy." So you see the same kind of phenomenon happening in very close social circles. So probably for you, if you're in the playwright community or in the academic community, I would say that predominantly those are people of democratic, capital D demo outlook. And so some of these are things like you have to toe the line, like much like a MAGA Republican. Actually, there's not much difference. So
well, we're really tribal, and it's like, and it's so. I like to go back to, like, how do we get through this? How do we cross those lines and communicate? There's a philosopher called Bertrand Russell, and he wrote an influential book on propaganda in the 1920s, and he reckoned that the thing we need is what he called critical undogmatic receptiveness. When we're evaluating whether something is true or not, to be critical, undogmatic, and receptive. I think you could also just say have an open mind, right? Same idea. And I reckon that we do need that, but before we can get to that point, first we have to care whether something is true or not. And that is the biggest leap, it seems to me, because the usual thing is to just adopt the view that makes us happy, that our people, our tribe believes, I'm with them. This is what my talking heads say. This is how it is. People who say other things are morons and lunatics. And it's like the example, we're all guilty of it. I'm not putting myself above the fray here. If I see a research article that says red wine is good for me, then red wine is good for me. And that's the end of the story, and there's another research article
that says the Ash experiment, where you see 4 people saying the line is this big and you just go in to get along. Conformist mentality is easy, and so is creating an environment bias. Everybody agrees the same way, is like safety.
Yeah.
So it's associated with safety too.
Yeah. You can always find something to support whatever view you want. This is the age of the internet. Something out there will agree with you, and if it's an issue you care about enough to, you can't study every issue, this is why you can look at the method, and it's a bit of a shortcut, like, okay, these people are begging you to look at the evidence, and these people are saying, shut up, I'm calling the police. That's a good clue. You don't have to be a subject expert, but if you do care about an issue enough to get into it, you can't just say, well, I've got a study and he's got the opposite study. You have to compare the studies. You'd have to get into it. What's the difference in the studies? What are the biases? How was the study designed? And you can do that with 1 or 2 issues, but it's time consuming, so it puts us at a disadvantage. But so that's why I advocate, you don't have to do that with every issue. You can get an idea, if you know how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to have dissent. We're supposed to have discussion. We're not supposed to just demonetize people's YouTube channels if they say the wrong thing, And that doesn't mean you have to engage with lunatics. I think, the other point I make is that you can tell crackpots from just dissenting opinions. It's possible to do that, and with just a little bit of effort.
Look at Flat Earth. I mean, you mentioned Flat Earth in your book. I've talked to Flat Earth Dave, God bless him, but I mean, some of his ideas are really, wow. We're on a spinning tube, and all of these things in the sky are moving in zigzag patterns. Like, it's psychedelic. Like, his view isn't just flat Earth, man.
Yeah.
Like, there's an ice wall. I mean, there's so many live things.
Wall.
Oh, wow.
I know. So, and I include that example in the book because it's like, as an example of, some things that sound crazy are crazy, and we can tell, and I hate to pile on the flat earth people, because I saw a documentary about the flat earth people, and they seemed so nice. They were like nice people. They had
Was it the
senses
one
of
where they
humor.
had the convention or whatever, and people went to the
Yeah,
convention? It's so funny.
I think
Yeah,
there
it's
was,
really good.
it was pretty funny,
Yeah.
and I just I feel sorry for them, and I hate to pile on, but, but they had one of them, I tell the story of, they had an idea. They bought some expensive piece of equipment. I'm going to space out on what it was called, but it was like a laser, laser ring gyroscope, something like that. It cost them $20,000. So they put their money where their mouth was, and they were like, if the Earth really is spinning, then this thing is going to show in 1 hour. It's going to show a rotation of, I forget that, 15 degrees, whatever, 360 divided by 24. That's my math. I think it was 15 degrees. And so they bought this thing, they put it in a box, they waited an hour, they took it out, it said 15 degrees, and they were like, oh, so then
This
like,
is
well,
fake. I had Flat
the,
Earth Dave tell me there were no flights from Chile to New Zealand because of the flat Earth. They had to go back north. And while he was talking about that, I went on to like American Airlines, and I saw the booking flight that went from Chile to Wellington or whatever.
So,
I'm like, you're full of baloney. Like, there's contradictory facts out there that they're not accepting. So it goes back to epistemology.
That's the point. That's the point, that you have to be willing to be proven wrong, and you should sort of have some idea of like, what would it take to convince me of something I don't want to believe, and so, and there should be something, there should be, you got to keep, it's easy to fix on an idea and just reflexively reject contrary evidence, but then you should be aware that ain't science.
Let me ask you this question, John. Isn't there like I talk about this is the theme, like enforcing against heterodoxy? Isn't there always, like, through propaganda, Bernays type propaganda that we've been in for 100 years, isn't it always trying to maintain the collective and conform the collective to one mode of thought? Like Iran is bad, or we've been fighting Iran for 50 years, or this is safe and effective to take these shots, or they're a greatest ally. I mean, come on.
Like, 100%. I mean, this is what, it's
so it's part of the crazy. So if you don't agree that Israel is our greatest ally, it's not, it may have been more popular in the past. It's not popular anymore. The only people who support them, according to my information, are people over 55. So the whole younger generation is really not happy with Netanyahu and Israel. And it's like,
oh, right.
I don't know how they're going to enforce that. So they're going to go, you want to talk about punishing people for opinions? That's going to be it. Like, you better toe the line on Israel or not, or else.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly been there's certain things that nobody wants to be called, right? Conspiracy theorist, lunatic, anti-Semitic. And no matter how much you say you're criticizing a particular government policy, you're still going to get, the name is still going to be thrown at you, and it's powerful. And that's part of the tabooing process, and what you're talking about in terms of enforcing. Every society has ways of sort of creating what was sometimes called the symbolic order, the cultural norms, the official narratives, the official stories, the things that you're sort of supposed to believe, and the things you're really not supposed to believe. And those are the taboos. Every society's got them. And it became, I think, more difficult to control information when the internet happened, so it was, they didn't used to have to work this hard. You had your mainstream news sources, and they pretty much towed the line. There was, and it wasn't a conspiracy. It was the fact that, it was like people got, as Noam Chomsky said, selected for obedience. There's mechanism, like you make it up the chain if you've got the right views, and he did an interview that became pretty famous with a BBC reporter, and he was like, that's nonsense. I can say whatever I want, nobody's censoring me. And Chomsky was like, and one of the things I agreed with him about, he said, well, I'm sure you believe everything you're saying. What I'm saying is, if you didn't believe those things, if you believed something else, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting,
It's still happening to today.
Of course, yeah. But the mainstream news sources are less influential, and so you've got people have alternative news sources, and so like now they have to deal with the internet. And so I think that's why, some of this stuff that comes across as a little more heavy-handed, where all of a sudden, you might get blasted in your social media with believe this, and if you believe that, you're nuts, and so the sort of information control programs
they're getting more sophisticated, but
are
they're
heavy.
different. Yeah.
And they're getting more sophisticated, but they're also just in some ways clumsily heavy-handed. Like do you remember, it was a few years ago, I don't remember what the issue of the day was, but there was this organization called Prop or Not. They were like, how do you tell if something's propaganda? And it was a very, mainstream solution. And what they wanted to do, I think it was supported by the Washington Post. And what they basically did was put together a list of sources you should trust. And they put together a list of sources you should not trust, and so it was all, there were no surprises. There were, trust the New York Times and the Washington Post, and don't trust, and then
don't trust
so like
a guy like Wayne Madsen, some guy typing in his, apartment.
And there was, but there was, if you ask me, how do you tell whether something is propaganda or not? Or you ask Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, it has to do with critical thinking and weighing evidence and keeping, critical, undogmatic receptiveness and caring about what's true. Not a word about critical thinking or, weighing evidence or anything. It was all about just trust us and don't trust them. And so, like, you'd think that sounds pretty blatantly ridiculous, but they're shockingly, to me, there are people who go like, okay, well, you can't trust those guys. They're just people
trust the experts, right? That's actually a logical fallacy.
Well,
but they still have, John, stuff like, I know people in the kind of alternate information community mentioned this site called NewsGuard, which basically does that.
Oh, yeah.
You just let NewsGuard decide what's good for you.
Right. Or you get, the Facebook fact checkers were tied to what was it, the Atlantic or so? It was like they were basically
they weren't objective. Yeah, that's the funny
thing. It's like a NATO offshoot. It was like some NATO organization, So it's like, okay, fact checkers. This is the thing, we're not experts, so we look to the experts, and everyone has to look to the experts. So, and you want to find somebody to check facts. It's a reasonable thing to try, but it's like, but then it's just unfortunately not that simple, because which fact checkers, and who supports them?
You don't know who's behind that. The guy who started NewsGuard was a guy who was trying to stop bias. And it was kind of a fool's errand. It was actually really interesting because back in the magazine era, but he was trying to eliminate bias. You just can't do it. People are biased.
There's no such thing. There's no such thing. The people I trust the least are the people who claim to be objective, You
can't get away from it. And it's just like something you have to pick and choose. And maybe having the bias, what's actually better, John, is having multiple biased people, because then you get different opinions from different perspectives. It's actually a good thing.
Absolutely. And, there is nothing in this world I like better than a good, honest debate. I want to see that people with the biases come together, make your argument, convince me. I will listen with an open mind. And then I like it, if you see a good debate, it's so wonderful, when they actually don't just talk past each other, but respond to each other's points, because, what about what he just said, and do you have an answer for that or not? And so a lot of times, you'll get people, there was, who was some new medical, I think it was the new head of the CDC, said that she would love to debate Aaron Siri, who's a lawyer who's done a lot of work for the vaccine injured. And
he works for RFK's outfit.
Right. And so he said, he was like, oh, she would like to debate me. That's great. And I would love to see that debate. I think, that's another word. That's another scary word, vaccine. As soon as you say vaccine, people get their shoulders tighten up, and you better say it's good, And
they just changed it. Trump came out and changed the vaccine schedule, I think, within
this
I
know.
week.
Yeah. And to the Denmark schedule, which is, people will sometimes people will say, they don't have these problems in Denmark, and then you'll be like, okay, so we should use their schedule. There's a lot of conflicting, again, this is, I think vaccines are a complicated issue. I think you get extremists on both sides. You have people who believe that every single vaccine is fantastic, and you have people that think every single vaccine is dangerous. I'm like, I don't know, but I one of the interesting studies that or teams, researchers that I found was this guy Peter Abbey. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Aabby. He did a study that the anti-vaxxers, if we can use that word. It's a word I hate, but it's a thought-ending word, like conspiracy theorists. But people who are against vaccines like to point to this one Abbey study where he discovered that there was a vaccine that was, I think it was DTaP, the one, pertussis, that's the one, yeah. In that people who took the vaccine, they had a great natural experiment in Guinea-Bissau where half the kids, very similar demographic, everything about them was the same, except half of them had the vaccine and half of them didn't. And they found that the half that had the vaccine were dying overall about twice as often. Overall mortality rate was twice of the kids that didn't have that vaccine, right? It did what it said. They didn't get those 3 diseases, but they died of other things. Okay, so you have to look at so it said, this vaccine, there's something wrong here. The against vaccines, people love that study, but the same team also found that there was a measles vaccine that they used that had the opposite effect. Kids that had that vaccine had a mortality rate that was better in ways that they couldn't just explain by it was measles. They weren't dying of measles, but they also weren't dying of other things, like their mortality improved more than you could explain by not getting measles. And so and they reckon that the difference was that the live vaccines versus non-live vaccines. I think that I get confused. I can't remember now. I think it was the live vaccines that were supposed to be the good ones, and the other ones were harmful. So they found a bunch of vaccines that were, I think, non-live that increased the excess mortality rate overall, and the other ones decreased it. So it's like, maybe a guy like me who's just trying to figure out what's going on. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what's true about vaccines, but it sounds to me like we could have a conversation without everybody losing their minds, that we could all have an interest in figuring out, and the people who found that the vaccines were bad, by the way, didn't turn into anti-vaxxers. They weren't saying ban these things. They were saying we can combine them with some of the good vaccines. If we delay them out, we can maybe get better results. Maybe it's a question of when you take it. So these are scientific questions that seem to me to be basically reasonable, and that why can't we have this kind of conversation without people calling each other names and hating each other, So that's the type of thing where I'm like, stop me if there's anything crazy in what I just said, because it seems to me that although the basic story is you're a crazy anti-vaxxer and probably a right-wing lunatic, where the scientific reality is more nuanced, there's, we have a world, like most things, it's more complicated than that. And, there's mixed results, and it's a little, it requires a little finer touch.
I found
that's nuts, right? That's lunacy, right?
It is kind of lunacy. Your other book was kind of a critique of kind of capitalist ideas, right? I mean, wasn't that what, when you wrote about realpolitik or
the surrealpolitik, it was kind of I would say it was a critique of the national security state. So it was kind of an analysis. It was a surreal take on surrealism, in the sense that the way that sort of our dream life or our delusions inform our reality, and so it was kind of looked into some of the stories of the national security state and interpreted them through that lens, so that I tried to make it funny, because it was started out as part of my PhD. It's the least
funny subject on earth. I mean, that's
but it was like, there were if you look at some of the stories that the national security state tells about terrorism, they're flimsy stories that fall. There's like, they'll have the same guy dying like 12 times.
No, it's terrible.
You just go through.
They get away with. The budget's bloated. It's inefficient. If you really want to end your life, like if you're suicidal, just ask to audit the Department of Defense or something. Anybody who audits that, suddenly a car crash or something, some mysterious drowning accident, you just don't even it's more of like a cartel mob type thing. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. It's really
bad. I hear you. Things.
You want to talk about a funny thing? We're coming up on the 25-year anniversary of 9/11 on September 10th, 2001. one of our great heroes, Rummy Rumsfeld, got out and said we can't find 2.3 trillion, and then it just got swept away.
2.3 trillion. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is evidence of
And
pre-knowledge. Like
unfortunately,
his timing of that release was just like it was
odd, isn't it?
exceptional.
That
It was
that
like
was one of the stranger things.
seeing
But
like
then-
the Loch Ness monster and Sasquatch on the same day or something. Like, wow,
Yeah.
you didn't like that would have caused a hubbub of unimaginable things.
And
if
the
you did
wing
it.
of the Pentagon that got destroyed was which wing? The financial accounting wing.
No, you're thinking too much. Come on.
Now I'm thinking too much. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's a coincidence. I'm not going to make too much of that.
I spent 3 years in Washington. Everybody's scheming and conspiratorial thinking, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on there all the time, literally all the time.
Yeah.
But like your insights, one of the quotes I get from Visigoth, the guy who was kind of one of the early internet interview pioneers, was from Robinson Jeffers, and he said the cold passion for truth hunts in no pack. So like a lot of this stuff is really about conformity and collectivism, collective ideology.
Yes.
That really are this collective ideology crosses these party lines and the left right paradigm and all that stuff. So people, it's a lot harder for people to, I mean, you see all these memes and stuff of people just like, I'm not going with the flow, or I don't believe you, or I'm not following the pack, and that's what people prefer. Actually, what you'll find is that they prefer somebody who thinks independently, because they appreciate that they've done the work to actually do the thinking. Like,
there are those people, and then there's people who really are just terrified to leave the comfort of the familiar narrative. They're happy with their set of stories. They know that they'll get nothing but pats on the back for repeating them, and they know that there's nothing but pain for sticking your neck out and looking at something else.
Those stories of journalists and truth tellers who've had their lives wrecked are legion. They are so many of those stories, and very different places, whether it's big pharma, nuclear power, defense, politics, just anything, like literal deaths. Like, it's not a joke. The reason I brought that up is kind of like, I'm curious into like your ideas, like in your book title, it's Capitalist Realisms and Nothing in Short, but there's a subtext of greed and payment. So a lot of these opinions these people have are not independent. They're not even set by things. They're set by because they're making money. Like, we don't know how much Fauci was making, like, on his ideas. That's the whole thing. So these guys have a financial incentive for their ideas, and a lot of people overlook that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's, I mean, I think if you speak in the abstract about like how should a regulatory system work, for example, I think if you asked most people, should a person who's in charge of determining whether a drug is safe or not, should that person be able to profit from that drug? Should they have a share in the patent rights? Should they get royalties from the sale of that drug? Their job is to regulate that drug. I think most people would say, no, that's crazy. Of course they should be separated from that. And then, and they'll agree with that. But then if you tell them, well, on the vaccine committees, they can get a share of the profits, then they'll be like, well,
this vaccine is great.
Right.
I think Fauci was making money off remdesivir, if I remember correctly.
I'm not sure. The one thing I always remember about remdesivir is that it was kicked out of an Ebola trial for being too dangerous. Yeah. So that one was okay to use.
50% mortality rate. They knew the mortality rate was very high. So we're in AZT territory.
But ivermectin, which is considered one of the absolute safest drugs in the world, and you can, was too dangerous. Don't use it. It's horse paste. It's crazy. You're going to die if you take ivermectin. But remdesivir, kicked out of an Ebola trial, use that one because we're so concerned about safety.
So who's the real disinformation purveyor, right? Is it really the lonely kind of analyst or the one-off doctor or somebody who's, working in alternate medicine, or is it these huge institutions, these huge lettered institutions like DHS or something like that?
Right.
Aren't they the real disinformation specialists?
Well, I'll leave that for people to decide for themselves. But it's funny you bring that up, because that's the other thing. As soon as somebody comes out and says, they're promoting a cheap generic medicine because they found that it's effective and they're a doctor, somebody is guaranteed to call them a grifter within 5 minutes. You're a grifter. He's out there trying to push these pills. I'm like, really? He's giving up, he's like sacrificing his medical career to sell cheap, unpatented generic medicines and if, but the pharmaceutical company has no financial incentive and no influence over what we do. Like, can you apply that same logic to both sides at least? I'm not saying who's right and wrong, but can we apply the logic equally and have the discussion?
This new mNRA shot that they approved, I think that there's it's $1,500. So it is not some kind of giveaway drug. It's clearly under patent and it's expensive. All of them, it's such a joke. Like ivermectin, the effective standard to its toxic standard, the space in between that is like one of the highest gaps in medical history, where you really have to take a lot of ivermectin to have some kind of sickness.
I mean, that's my understanding as well. But like I say, I'm not asking people to
live in an information
believe
blizzard.
What I say.
So all this stuff we're talking about is very important because we're bombarded with propaganda. There's people howling through the blizzard about the truth. There's a lot of deliberate obfuscation. This is the post-truth world. Like, there's a lot of people out there who do not care about the truth. They just have either financial interest, political interest. Yeah. There's some other
social interest,
lever, social interest in maintaining something that may not be the most optimal factual piece of information for the people. It's suboptimal, actually.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to people who just don't, you can't deal with the trouble that it will cause to step outside, your echo chamber. I get it. I sympathize, but the problem is that it's not risk free. You think you're avoiding a risk or avoiding trouble, but you're not. The risk is that society, as a result, if everyone does that, and truth remains something that nobody cares about, and this trend towards authoritarianism is allowed to continue with required views and forbidden views, that's not, you'll be comfortable for a little while in your little comfort hole, but you may look up one day and find out that you don't live in the country you thought you lived in.
Amen. We're very well said. We're at the 52-minute mark, John. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I mean, you're very well spoken. I'm curious about your kind of fictional work. You've written a lot of plays. I was looking through your thing. Do you kind of have a take? Like, could you have a general? I think you mentioned at the outset you wrote absurdist fiction, and it made me think of Albert Camus, kind of like.
Yeah. He's one of the heroes. Yeah. I try to make whenever I write something, I try to make it funny because I think if nothing, I don't like it when people are overly earnest about anything, really. So I try to throw some laughs in there, and there's plenty of absurdity in the world to play on, and it's a rich source of inspiration. Just looking for the absurdities, and I also find when there's things that genuinely enrage me politically, there's plenty to get enraged about, but nobody likes a shouting enraged guy, right? So if you can turn that into comedy, I just find that that's a healthier way, personally, and also a more relatable way. You get people to listen more if you can make them laugh at the same time.
I think so. It's actually probably the best way to truth. They actually say that's how you get a comic response, is that you make somebody realize something they didn't realize before, and that's what makes them laugh. Like, that's the dynamic, the psychological dynamic.
Yep.
Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Oh, I think we've covered enough stuff here. I don't know. People's brains might be full. Mine is.
I think the takeaway is really kind of do the critical analysis. Don't be afraid to buck the system or have heterodox ideas. Because a lot of the stuff there is enforced, collective thought process or Borg. I like the science fiction analogy or metaphor for the Borg from Star Trek or something. Like, you're all going to be zombified. In some ways, that's what this normie term kind of is almost a zombie who's been programmed through TV, safe and effective.
Yeah.
All of your solutions
Yeah.
will be solved by taking a pill. Have you ever watched TV these days? I can't watch TV. Like 80% of it is take this pill for diabetes, high
Yeah.
blood pressure, blah blah blah.
I noticed one last night. I was watching something on Netflix and an ad popped up and it was for, it didn't even say what the pill was for. It just said, here's this pill. Ask your doctor about it. And it's like, okay.
It's
What
almost like a dystopia. Like it really is a kind of dystopia.
Yeah.
I think we're used to it. It really is a dystopia. We're just used to it. We've been boiled. The frog has been boiled.
Pill for everything. So my parting words would be the earth is round and we should talk more.
Amen. Amen. It's John Schoneboom, and your website is your full name, John Schoneboom. And you can where's the best place to reach you? Is social media or your website?
Oh yeah, I guess through the website there's an email address on there. I'm on the various socials.
And like I said, you have 2 fiction books. And how many plays have you written? I mean, it looks like you have a pretty long list.
I've written, there's probably 25 or so of them.
Wow.
They're different length. Most of them are real short, little short plays, a couple of long ones.
Cool. Congrats. Well, thanks for coming on, and congrats on the book. Again,
thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. John Schoneboom, and the full title of this book is Stop Me If I Say Something Crazy, Disinformation and Dissent in the Post-Truth World. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.